Two houses, a story of deception, consequences, and the truth that lives in the light. For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open. Luke 8:17. He was a good husband. That was the thing both women would tell people afterward, in the strange, disorienting weeks when everything came apart. Not sarcastically, not with bitterness layered over the memory, with the genuine, bewildered grief of two women who had each independently believed the same thing about the same man. He was attentive, he remembered anniversaries, he came home with flowers for no reason, he knew how both women took their coffee and which side of the bed they preferred and what made each of them laugh. He was, by the observable evidence of the life he showed each of them, a man who was fully present in his marriage. He was fully present in both of them. His name is Franklin Grier. He is 43 years old. He is currently explaining himself to a family court judge in the state of Georgia. And the explanation is not going well. But we are getting ahead of the story. Because before the courtroom, there was a Tuesday night when his wife, Claudette, opened a credit card statement that had been mistakenly delivered to their mailbox instead of the P.O. box he had been using for 6 years. And the address at the top was not their address, and the charges were not their charges. And the name on the account was Franklin Grier, and the life it described was not the life she knew. This is the story of two women, one man, and the Tuesday that changed everything. Before we move forward with the story, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to help us to grow this channel to uplift more people. To understand how a man maintains two complete lives simultaneously for 6 years, you have to understand how he came to believe he could. Franklin Grier grew up in Savannah, Georgia, the only son in a household where his father, Bernard, was charming, magnetic, and largely absent in the ways that mattered, present at dinners and absent at recitals, present for the public performance of fatherhood and unavailable for its private, unglamorous substance. Bernard Grier had affairs throughout Franklin's childhood that Franklin was aware of by the time he was 14. Aware not because anyone told him, but because he was perceptive and the evidence was not well hidden, and no one in the household ever spoke plainly about what was visible. What Franklin absorbed from this, without anyone intending to teach him, was a specific and dangerous lesson that a man of sufficient charm and organization could maintain separate compartments in his life, and that the people in each compartment would, if managed correctly, never compare notes. He did not consciously decide to be his father. He would have rejected that description furiously. But the blueprint had been laid in adolescence, and the blueprint has a way of activating under pressure. He was genuinely intelligent. He had a civil engineering degree from Georgia Tech and a successful project management career that provided both the income necessary to run two households and, critically, a built-in alibi. Project managers travel. They have site visits and client meetings and extended out-of-town assignments. The architecture of his professional life was nearly perfectly suited, by coincidence that became convenience, for the architecture of his personal life. He met Claudette at 28. She was a dental hygienist from Augusta. Warm, organized, with the specific competence of a woman who ran her life and her relationships with the same clear-eyed effectiveness. They married after 2 years. They had a son, Marcus. No, we are not using that name. Their son, Tobias, now 9. They had a house in Decatur and a routine built on genuine affection and the ordinary, dignified infrastructure of a functional marriage. Franklin loved Claudette. This is not offered as mitigation. It is offered because it is true, and the truth of it is part of what makes the story so specific and so troubling. He was not a man who had stopped loving his wife. He was a man who had decided, somewhere in the gap between what he wanted and what he believed he was entitled to, that love was not the same as exclusivity. He met Vanessa at a work conference in Atlanta 3 years into his marriage. She was a marketing director, confident and composed, and the attraction was immediate and mutual. He told himself it would be a brief and contained thing. It was not. Within 18 months, he had proposed to Vanessa. He did not tell her he was already married. He built the second life with the same professional project management skills he brought to work: timeline, resource allocation, risk assessment, contingency planning. He maintained a P.O. box for Vanessa's address correspondence. He kept 2 phones, the overlap managed with the precision of someone who has studied the logistics problem carefully. He divided his time with an engineer's attention to schedule. He told Claudette that his projects required monthly weeks away. He told Vanessa the same thing in the opposite direction. For 6 years, the system held, until the credit card statement went to the wrong address. Claudette Grier was a woman who trusted her husband because he had, for 9 years, given her no observable reason not to. She was not naive. She was not the kind of woman who missed things. She had noticed, over the past 18 months, a collection of small frictions, windows of time during his trips, when calls went to voicemail and texts sat on delivered without response for hours. A charge on their joint account for a restaurant in a city he hadn't mentioned being in. A receipt in a jacket pocket for a jewelry store, for a piece she had never received. She had raised each of these individually, and each time Franklin had an explanation. The meeting ran long. The charge was a client dinner. The receipt was for a gift he was still planning. Each explanation was plausible. None of them fully resolved the feeling underneath it. She had talked to her sister about the feeling. Her sister had said, "Claudette, that man loves you. You're looking for problems." She had talked to God about it. She had prayed for peace about the feeling, and when the peace did not fully come, she had decided the unease was her own anxiety and had tried to manage it accordingly. She was managing it on a Tuesday evening in September, when she retrieved the mail and found, among the ordinary stack of envelopes, a credit card statement addressed to Franklin Grier at their home address. She almost put it on his desk. He handled the finances. That was their arrangement. She managed the household accounts. He managed the credit cards. She held it for a moment. She opened it. The address at the top was a street in Marietta she had never heard Franklin mention. The charges covered 6 months of a life she did not recognize. A mortgage payment, a grocery store, a pediatrician visit. She sat down on the kitchen floor. Not dramatically. Her legs simply made the decision for her. She sat on the kitchen floor of the house she had lived in for 7 years, with the credit card statement in her hand, and felt the architecture of her known world shift on its foundation in the specific seismic way of a person receiving information that reorganizes everything they thought they knew. Tobias was in the next room doing homework. She got up off the floor before he could come in. In Marietta, in the house on Clearfield Drive, Vanessa Grier, the name she had been using for 4 years, was putting her 3-year-old daughter Sophia to bed when her phone showed a call from an unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. She checked the voicemail after Sophia was asleep. It was a woman's voice, calm, precise, the voice of a woman who had rehearsed what she was going to say and was delivering it without the performance of emotion, which was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. It said, "My name is Claudette Grier. I have been married to Franklin Grier for 9 years. I believe you know him. I think we need to talk. Please call me back." Vanessa sat on the edge of Sophia's bed in the dark and listened to the message twice. She called back. The phone call lasted 47 minutes. Neither woman would be able to reconstruct it precisely afterward. It was not a linear conversation. It moved through information and emotion and silence and the specific, bizarre negotiation of two people who are simultaneously strangers and members of the same catastrophe, trying to establish what they know and what they don't, and what the shape of the thing is that they are both standing inside. Claudette was the one who had called first, which meant she had had a few more hours with the information. She was not past the shock. She was operating through it, which was a gear she had shifted into because Tobias was in the house, and she could not afford to not be functional. Vanessa was receiving it in real time. She asked questions that were practical and specific, the kind of questions that come from someone in a professional field who manages information for a living and is trying to build a complete picture before she reacts to the partial one. They established the timeline: 9 years for Claudette, 4 years of courtship and marriage for Vanessa, though the word marriage was doing something complicated in the air between them by the time they reached it, because Claudette's existence made Vanessa's marriage a legal impossibility. You cannot marry a man who is already married. The ceremony Vanessa had believed was her wedding had been a performance with no legal standing. Vanessa was not legally his wife. She had a 3-year-old daughter and a mortgage, and 4 years of her life, and a name that was not her legal name, and a marriage certificate that was, she would confirm with an attorney the following day, not worth the paper it was printed on. Claudette was legally his wife. There was nothing comfortable about that. They talked for 47 minutes, and at the end of it, Claudette said, I need you to know that I am not calling you to be enemies. I'm calling you because we both needed to know the truth." There was a silence on the other end. Vanessa said, "I didn't know." "I know," Claudette said. "I could hear it." Another silence. "My daughter is 3 years old," Vanessa said. "I know," Claudette said. Her voice stayed steady on the 2 words, though it cost her something visible even through the phone. "I know." Franklin was due home from the word needed quotation marks now, business trip on Thursday. He came home to Decatur on Thursday evening, carrying a rolling suitcase and the unguarded ease of a man who has returned to one of his 2 lives and believes the other one is currently sealed off in its appropriate compartment. Claudette was sitting at the kitchen table. The credit card statement was on the table in front of her. He read the room. He was good at reading rooms. It was a skill his particular life had refined, and did something she would always remember. He did not immediately ask what it was. He put his suitcase down. He looked at her. He looked at the statement. The calculation was visible. She could see it. The rapid internal assessment of a man who has been managing logistics for 6 years, trying to determine which version of the explanation would be most effective. She said, "Don't. Just that." He stopped calculating. She said, "I spoke to Vanessa. We spoke for 47 minutes on Tuesday night. I know everything." The word everything landed in the room with specific weight. He sat down. What followed was the kind of conversation that is less a conversation and more a reckoning. The truth coming out in pieces, each piece adding to the shape of the thing, the shape getting larger and more specific and more damaging as each new piece arrived. The second household. The ceremony with Vanessa that he had conducted knowing it was legally meaningless. Tobias and Sophia sharing a father who had never told either child the other one existed. He cried. She believed the tears were real, and also understood that real tears were not exculpatory. He said, "I love you." She said, "I know, and that is the part I will be working through for a very long time." She told him to leave. He left. Claudette moved through the weeks that followed with the specific, determined functionality of a woman who has a 9-year-old son who needs his mother to remain upright. She retained an attorney. She contacted a counselor, a woman named Dr. Beverly Osei, who specialized in relational betrayal and who became, over the following months, one of the most important people in Claudette's recovery. She told Tobias, in age-appropriate language, that his father would be living somewhere else for a while, and that both his parents loved him, and that none of this was about him. She cried. She was furious. She went through the cabinet in the kitchen and found things she had to reinterpret. The travel schedule, the bank withdrawals, the jewelry store receipt, all the evidence she had explained away for 18 months, and she sat with the specific, burning humiliation of having been deceived by someone she trusted completely. She also, because she was Claudette Grier and she had been going to Shiloh Seventh-day Adventist Church for 6 years, brought it to God with the same honesty she had brought everything else that was too large to carry alone. Vanessa was navigating something simultaneously similar and different. She was grieving a marriage that had not been a marriage. She was a single mother in a legal sense that she had not consented to being. She was managing the practical unraveling of a life built on a false foundation. The name, the accounts, the mortgage, the documents that needed to be corrected. She was explaining to her own family and friends something that she was still processing herself. She was also, unexpectedly and without asking for it, receiving calls from Claudette. Not often. Not intrusively. Claudette called twice in the first month with information that Vanessa needed. Logistics, legal details, things connected to the unraveling of the shared situation. Each call was brief and practical and ended with a warmth that neither of them had expected, and both of them quietly held on to. 2 women in separate cities holding the wreckage of the same deception and choosing, each independently, not to be enemies. Claudette had been a member of Shiloh Seventh-day Adventist Church in Decatur for 6 years. Pastor Wendell Hayes had been the pastor there for 11 years. A tall, measured man who preached with the specific gravity of someone who took the text seriously and trusted that the people in the room could handle it. She came to him 3 weeks after Franklin left, not because she had no one else. She had her sister, her mother, Dr. Osei, but because she needed someone who could hold both the pastoral and the theological weight of what she was carrying. The question underneath all the practical questions was a larger one. How does God let this happen? I prayed about this. I had doubts, and I prayed, and I believed the peace that came was an answer. Was I wrong? Was he not listening? Or was he trying to tell me something I wasn't willing to hear? Pastor Hayes listened to the full question without abbreviating it. He said, Luke 8:17, "There is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open." I have preached that verse as a warning to people living in concealment. I want to offer it to you today as something else, as a promise. He looked at her. God did not look away from your marriage. He did not miss what Franklin was doing. The concealment was Franklin's. The disclosure was God's. The credit card statement that went to the wrong address. There is no version of that is accidental. She had thought about this. You think God sent it? I think nothing is outside his reach, Pastor Hayes said carefully, including the routing of mail. I think the truth was always going to come out because he promised it would. The only variable was timing. He paused. And I think he waited until you were strong enough to receive it and survive it. Because you are surviving it. She sat with that for a long time. Franklin had been staying in a hotel for 3 weeks when Vanessa called him. The call was brief and specific. She told him she had spoken to an attorney. She told him what the attorney had confirmed about the legal status of their marriage. She told him that she was changing the locks on the Marietta house. She told him that her attorney would be in contact about Sophia, and about the financial obligations that did not require a legal marriage to exist. She said one more thing before she ended the call. She said, I want you to know that I am not interested in what you have to say to me right now. I may be interested in it later. Right now, I need you to understand that the person you thought you were managing, I was never that person. I was a real person, and you treated me as a variable in your equation, and I need you to know that I know that. She ended the call. Franklin sat in the hotel room and felt something that had not, in 6 years of careful management and logistics and risk assessment, penetrated the compartmentalization. He felt it all at the same time. Not the fear of consequences, that had been present for weeks. Not the practical dread of attorneys and court dates and the collapse of the financial architecture he had built. Something older than all of that. The specific shame of being seen, not performed at, not managed, not charmed, but seen accurately and found to be exactly what he was. He had not cried in the conversation with Claudette because he was sorry. He had cried because the system had failed. There is a difference. He was alone in a hotel room in Atlanta, and the system had failed, and what was left when you removed the system was a man who had been building things that impressed people since he was a boy in Savannah, watching his father work a room, and who had somewhere in the building lost access to the question of who he actually was underneath the performance. He opened the Bible app on his phone, the phone that now had no purpose of concealment, because there was nothing left to conceal. He read Luke 8:17. He read it twice. Then he did something he had not done since his grandmother took him to church as a child in Savannah. He prayed, not for outcomes or for the mitigation of consequences, just, I am exactly what this says I am. I have been hiding in plain sight. I don't know what comes next, but I can't do what I've been doing anymore. It was not the prayer of a transformed man. It was the prayer of a man at the beginning of a very long road. The family court date was 6 weeks later. The legal proceedings established what the attorneys had already confirmed. Claudette was Franklin's legal wife. The 9-year marriage was valid. The divorce proceedings would be standard. Vanessa had no legal standing as a spouse, but her attorney had moved successfully to establish Franklin's parental obligations to Sophia, which were significant and binding regardless of the marital status of the adults. Franklin sat in the courtroom and heard the complete accounting of what he had built and what it had cost. In numbers, in legal language, in the specific dry recitation of a judge who had seen variations of this before and had the measured composure of someone who deals with the consequences of human choices professionally. He did not look at Claudette across the courtroom. He looked at the table in front of him. He thought about Tobias, 9 years old, who had asked his mother 2 weeks ago why Daddy seemed sad when he came for his visits. He thought about Sophia, 3 years old, who would grow up knowing that her father had constructed a life that required her not to exist in one half of it. These were the consequences that the logistics had never fully calculated. 8 months after the credit card statement, Claudette was in the fellowship hall at Shiloh after the Sabbath service, helping stack chairs, a task she had returned to 3 months ago when she had enough energy for participation again, when her phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. They had been in occasional contact, practical at first, then, slowly, strangely, in the way that people who have survived the same specific disaster sometimes develop a language for it, something closer to genuine. The text said, "I'm in Decatur this weekend for a conference. I know this is unusual, but would you want to get coffee?" Claudette looked at the text for a moment. She typed back, "Yes, Sunday morning. I know a place." They sat across from each other in a coffee shop on Sunday morning. Two women who had never met before a phone call 8 months ago, and who had more in common than either of them had wanted. They talked for 2 hours about their children, about the recovery, about the long, non-linear work of rebuilding a life after a deception of that scale. At the end of the coffee, Vanessa said, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "How are you?" She paused, choosing the word carefully. "How are you okay? Because I am getting there. But you seem further along than I am, and I want to know what you're doing." Claudette thought about it honestly. "I go to church," she said. "I go to therapy. I talk to my pastor. And I keep coming back to a verse. Nothing hidden that will not be disclosed. I used to read that as a warning. Now I read it as, God doesn't let lies live permanently. He hates them too much. Whatever Franklin built in the dark was always going to come into the light. And the light, even when it's terrible to look at." She paused. "The light is better than the dark." Vanessa was quiet. "I haven't been to church in years," she said. Claudette picked up her coffee cup. "Well," she said, "I go on Saturdays." Franklin Grier is a fictional man, but the blueprint he operated from is not fictional. The belief that a sufficiently organized person can maintain a life of deception indefinitely without the truth eventually surfacing. Luke 8:17 exists as a promise and as a warning simultaneously. As a warning to anyone living in concealment, the architecture will eventually fail. Not might, will. Every hidden thing contains its own disclosure. The variable is not whether, it is when and how. But it also exists as a promise to the people on the other side of the deception. The ones who trusted someone who was not trustworthy. The ones who prayed about their doubts and received a peace that felt like an answer. God does not look away. He does not miss what happens in the dark. And the fact that he allows time to pass before the truth surfaces is not evidence of his absence. It is evidence of his specific, particular care about the timing of impact. The truth came when Claudette was ready. The truth came through a misdelivered piece of mail. There is nothing outside his reach. Here is the other lesson. The one that is harder to say plainly. A man is not only what he builds. He is what he builds and who he is when there is no one watching and nothing to maintain. Franklin Grier was shaped by a blueprint he inherited and never examined. He mistook performance for character. He confused management for integrity. Character is what you are in the rooms no one sees. When those rooms are eventually disclosed, and they are always eventually disclosed, your character is what you will have to stand in. Build accordingly, for there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open. Luke 8:17. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to be notified about more inspirational stories on redemption and hope.